Alright, what's going on everyone? Since Wizards of the Coast refuses to acknowledge that Challenger decks ever existed, I've taken it upon myself to build budget versions of Tier 1 competitive decks, and today we'll be building Mono Red Aggro. Because there's always a Mono Red Aggro Challenger deck, you can't escape it, and I'm part of the problem. So this deck is very easy to build on a budget because it's basically already a budget deck to begin with. Tier 1 Red Aggro decks typically cost between $60 and $70, so if you're okay with that price, I would actually encourage you to just go to a meta tracking website and copy a deck. But in terms of budget, we can do better. My build is going to be closer to $40, which is pretty close to the price of a Challenger deck, and we won't be losing too much power because the majority of the deck is bulk anyway. Almost every single card in this deck is worth less than $1. From the common and uncommon aggro creatures to the more powerful rares, pretty much everything can be picked up for cheap, with a couple notable exceptions. Play with Fire is currently about $2.30 each, so it's about $10 for a playset, which is a little annoying considering it's basically a glorified shock, and Bloodthirsty Adversaries are about $7 each, so it costs nearly $30 for the full 4 copies. Don't get me wrong, this is definitely a powerful card, but we can do without Adversary and reduce the total deck price significantly, and we can always upgrade into Adversary at a later date. So let's start with the 1-drops. We'll be playing 4 each of Kamano Faces Kakazan, Monastery Swift Spear, and Phoenix Chick. The Saga deals 1 damage to the opponent when it enters, then it will add a +1/+1 counter to the next creature we play, making it perfect to play on turn 1 because we get that counter on turn 2, often on a haste creature too, by the way. And then it flips into a 2/2 with haste. Swift Spear is a 1/2 with haste and prowess that gets +1/+1 whenever we cast a non-creature, and do note that the Saga triggers prowess. And the Chick is just a 1-mana, 1/1 flying haste that can reanimate from the graveyard, so it's just like this obnoxious recursive threat, and it's great at soaking up the +1/+1 counters from the Saga considering it has evasion. And these bring our total up to $4.44. Moving on to the legends in the deck, we have 3 each of Felden, Ronom Excavator, Godric, Cloaked Reveler, and Squee, Dubious Monarch. The first is a 2/2 with haste. It can't block, but that's fine because we're looking to attack anyway. And when it takes damage, you get free cards off the top of the library, so it can replace itself. Godric is a 3-mana 3/3 with haste, and if you play 2 permanents in a turn, it becomes a 4/4 with flying, and note that the Saga will trigger it when it flips. And Squee is a 2/2 with haste that makes a 1/1 token when it attacks, and if it dies, it can be recast from the graveyard, so another great recursive threat to keep up pressure in the mid game. And this brings our total price to $8.76. Next we'll add our burn spells. We'll be playing 4 each of Play with Fire and Lightning Strike, as well as 2 Witchstalker Frenzy. Some decks play the full 4 copies of Frenzy, as it is our best answer to Sheoldred. I'm planning on playing 2 main board and then 2 Nahiri's Warpath in the sideboard, which is also an answer to Sheoldred. But if you're playing against Sheoldred regularly, you can definitely play the full 4 copies of Witchstalker Frenzy. Anyway, Play with Fire is basically just a fancy shock. It lets you scry if you hit the opponent with it. It's kind of annoying that these are $10 for the playset, but I do think it's worth it. Though do note that shock is being reprinted in Karlov Manor, and these are likely to be like 10 cents each or whatever, so you can save like $10 if you don't care about that scry. It is important because it helps you mitigate flood, right? You can scry lands to the bottom and stuff like that, but you know, it's up to you. Lightning Strike is a classic 2-mana, 3 damage, played in 100% of published decks, and it's worthless bulk, so we're definitely playing 4 copies. And this brings the total deck price to $18.56. Those Play with Fires are literally making up 50% of the deck's price. Next, we're playing 4 copies of Charming Scoundrel and 2 copies of Monstrous Rage. Charming Scoundrel doesn't look aggressive at first, but you can add a Wicked Rule to it, making it a 2-mana 2/2 with haste that makes the opponent lose 1 when it dies. Perfectly fine in an aggro deck. It can also make a treasure if your mana is screwed, and it can discard and draw if you're flooded, so it helps with mana problems. Monstrous Rage can create huge power swings. It only gives the creature +2/+0, which might not seem like much, but it also adds a monster rule token, which gives +1/+1 and trample, so playing this on a Monastery Swiftspear, for example, makes it a 5/4 trampler, and it's not bad casting this on a Phoenix Chick either, just because that +1/+1 is really nice on any Evasive Flyer. So this brings our total up to $22.52. So before moving on to the mana base, I want to talk about Bloodthirsty Adversary. If you want to add these, the flex spots in the deck are Phoenix Chick, Charming Scoundrel, and Monstrous Rage. Most of the cards in this deck are pretty set in stone, but when it comes to Phoenix Chick, Charming Scoundrel, and Monstrous Rage, these are a bit all over the place. Like, some people will play Forest Scoundrel but no Chicks. Some people do the opposite. Monstrous Rage is only in about 40% of decks, so if you're looking to add Bloodthirsty Adversary, you're probably looking to cut some of these. This is also true if you want to add the 2 extra Witchstalker Frenzy. You can take 2 Monstrous Rage out for those. Moving on to the mana base, we'll start with 20 Mountains. The benefit of playing a monocolor deck is we can save a ton of money here. We can just play basics because we don't need dual lands. However, I do think it's worth playing 2 Mishra's Foundry and 2 Sokken's Crucible of Defiance. The Foundry animates into a 2/2, which can help close out games, especially after the opponent plays a board sweeper, right? Very useful. And the Crucible can be channeled to make 2 1/1s. And the best part about this is because it's a channel ability, it cannot be countered by a blue counterspell, so it's a great way to sneak a couple of hasty 1/1s on the battlefield if the opponent has blue mana up. Some decks do run like 3 to 4 copies of Foundry, and many decks play 2 Sokken's, but I think it's fine to start with. You can always add extra if you're feeling like it at a later date. These lands do cost a few dollars, but we're still at $28.21, which is pretty close to the retail price of the old Challenger decks. Fortunately, our sideboard doesn't add too much to our deck cost. We have 4 Lithomantic Barrage, 2 Nahiri's Warcrafting, and 3 in the Festivities. The first is great against white aggro decks and can make dealing with Rafine easy as well. Their Warcrafting is for Sheoldred, giving us another spell that can deal 5 damage, and in the Festivities is great against opposing aggro decks, particularly ones with a lot of 1/1 tokens. We also have additional aggro threats with Furnace Punisher and Urabrask's Forge. The Punisher deals damage every turn to players who don't have basics, so it's great against things like Esper Legends and Domain. And the Forge sits on the battlefield and makes larger and larger tokens every turn, which is perfect for like Azorius control decks. If you can just sneak this past them and get it on the battlefield, it becomes very difficult for them to deal with. And that brings our sideboard cost to $9.17 and our total deck cost to $37.38. And that is with those $10 worth of Play with Fire and a $9 sideboard. So if you're playing casually and you don't care about the sideboard or that scry on the Play with Fire, we're actually under $20, which is pretty great for casual. So yeah, that's our deck. We literally only had to cut 1 card basically. And while it's good, I think we still have like basically a red aggro deck. Bloodthirsty Adversary is great, but you know, we can get a pretty good deck here for $40. So this is great if you're looking for a budget casual deck or just a starting point if you just want to, you know, play Friday Night Magic right now and, you know, maybe buy those Bloodthirsty Adversaries a month or 2 from now. That works. So yeah, if you want to see more budget guides like this, I have a link to a playlist in the description below. This is only the 2nd video in the series, so there might not be much to see if you're watching this close to release, but if you want to see more, you can always subscribe to be notified of future uploads. And in the meantime, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.